Hi, I'm Wayne Lennox from Cottage Life. You know, most folks at the cottage would consider building a deck, but often the idea of building stairs scares them because the stringer layout is very challenging, or at least they think it is. I'm here today to show you how to do this in a simple fashion. The first thing we need to do is determine our rise. The rise of our steps will determine the number of treads. I've affixed a 2x4 to this deck, simply clamped it on, and this way I will be able to determine the height from the ground. I'm just going to pick an arbitrary point here, and I measure this and I get 43.5. The Ontario Building Code says that the step must be anywhere between 4 7/8 and 7 7/8. I'm kind of partial to 7, so if I divide that into 43.5, I come up with around 6 steps. Now, 6 steps, a typical tread is going to be about 10 inches. Obviously my run then, 6 times 10 would be 60 inches away from the deck. Now I'd like to measure away from the deck that 60 inches just to make sure that my rise is still consistent. In cottage country, that's not likely to be the case. So I measure out 60, and then I'm going to drop a vertical from there. I'll check that again. 43.5, can you believe it? All right, now I know my rise, approximately 43.5, and I know my run, 60 inches. Now I can build a stringer. Typically, material used for a stringer is going to be 2x10 or 2x12 stock. You don't want to make mistakes with that material. It's expensive. So what I suggest for a first-time stair builder is perhaps do the layout on a piece of scrap plywood, and that might save you that embarrassing trip back to the lumberyard for an extra stringer. All right, our rise was 43.5 inches. Well, you don't have to be much of a scholar to realize that 7 doesn't go into that evenly. We're going to have 6 steps times 7, 42. That's not going to be quite enough. So I'm going to have to look at some fraction then for my rise. 7.25 inches times 6 will give me my 43.5. So I know that my rise is 7.25 inches. Now we need a square. I don't mean your brother-in-law. I mean a carpenter square. And this will help us do the layout accurately. I'm going to set the square down on my template to give me a 7.25 inch rise and a 10-inch run. Okay? Now, I can draw that. There's the actual height of my stair, the actual run of my stair. Okay? Rise, run. You don't need to use a tool like this or an accessory like this, but I like using stair gauges or angle gauges because they'll maintain perfect accuracy every time I do my layout. Now it's easy for me to move my square down my stringer, and as soon as my 7.25 meets this line of my run, draw. I should note that I've made sure to leave enough room here for my top step. Don't start too close to the top of the board. I need another 10 inches back here, my top step. If you don't have stair gauges, you can fashion something similar with using a simple piece of lumber and a couple of handy clamps. Not nearly as pretty, but okay, there's my 7.25. 10's not quite on there. There we go. Clamp down. Now I've made a good alternate system, a little cheaper than the stair gauges. 5. That's the end of my 6th step. Now, each one of these steps should measure 7.25 inches with the 1.5 inch top step. So my first step should be 1.5 inches narrower than the rest. This is the bottom of my step. Measures 1.5 inches less than the others. Now, but when I add my 1.5 inches tread on top, 7.25, 7.25, 7.25, 7.25 to the top. Now, let's also draw my top tread 10 inches. Flip my square around. Perpendicular line. Voila. There's the layout for our stringer. and 1.5 inches for the top step. Okay, so that's about it. We started out by determining our rise. We were able to determine a run based on the rise, and now we've created a simple template that we can go to the lumber store, order all our material. In fact, this template would serve as a guide for all of your stringers. Just simply cut out the rest of it. You've already done the math. Lay it out on your lumber and proceed from there. You know, the code varies quite a bit, so you want to make sure before you start a project like this that you check with your local building department.